Thank you for joining us today. We are just waiting for a few more folks to trickle in, so please feel free to make yourself comfortable at home. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We're very excited that you're joining us to hear about the this year's winners. We also have French interpretation available as well. So if you prefer to listen in French, there's the option in the toolbar below where it says interpretation. You just click on it and you can select which channel you want to listen to. One of our presenters will also be speaking in both English and French. So if you don't, if you're not fluent in French or don't understand it, you're more than welcome to click on the interpretation globe icon in your Zoom toolbar and select the English option so that when she speaks French, you'll be able to hear the interpretation in English. All right, just like seeing how we have some folks trickling in. Yeah, I guess I can get started now then. So hello everyone again, welcome and thank you for joining us for the 2025 Research Impact Canada Engaged Scholarship Award webinar. My name is Sandy Chan from Research Impact Canada and I'll be your host for today. Before we begin, we'd like to start with the land acknowledgements. We acknowledge Research Impact Canada's presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaranto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon, One Pump Bill Covenant, an agreement to peacefully share and care for the Great Lakes region. I'll also drop the French land acknowledgements in the chat, and we invite you to share your land acknowledgements in the same chat below as well. Over the next hour, we will celebrate the exceptional work of our 4 award winners as they showcase their impactful research projects that have utilized knowledge mobilization principles and practices and the meaningful outcomes they achieved. Through deep partnerships with the communities, they turned research into a catalyst for change. It will spark ideas and connections for all of us here today. So we have 4 winners in 2 categories to announce. In the Doctorate category, our winners are Katrina Leclerc from St. Paul University and Rita Meng from McMaster University. In the Master's category, our winners are Sarah Demedeiros from the University of Alberta and Rowan Harris from McMaster University. Now, without further ado, let's turn it over to the winners so they can introduce themselves and present on the projects. So first up, we have Katrina Leclerc from St. Paul University.
Thank you so much, Sandy, and thank you everyone for joining us. I will be speaking both in English and in French, so warning, if you need interpretation, please do use the globe icon to select the language of your choice. So thank you again to Research Impact Canada for this recognition and for creating space to highlight engaged scholarship. I'm joining you today from Tsawwassen First Nation on our beautiful West Coast. It's an honor to be part of this conversation alongside other emerging scholars working to bridge research and practice in ways that center justice, relationships, and impact. Au cours des 10 dernières années, j'ai occupé de divers rôles à l'intersection de la recherche, des politiques publiques et du travail de consolidation de la paix à l'échelle communautaire, notamment en collaboration avec des gouvernements, des organismes non gouvernementaux, internationaux et des mouvements de jeunes dans des pays comme le Tchad, la République démocratique du Congo, le Liban, le Rwanda et évidemment ici aussi au Canada. Le projet que je vais vous présenter aujourd'hui est le fruit de cette combinaison entre la recherche académique et l'engagement pratique. Il est également guidé par un engagement profond envers quelque chose qui peut sembler à première vue assez simple: veiller à ce que les jeunes, en particulier les jeunes femmes, soient véritablement écoutées et réellement impliquées dans les décisions qui affectent leur vie et leur avenir. So my research focuses on the Global Youth Peace and Security Agenda, often abbreviated as YPS. This agenda is formalized in 2015 with the adoption of the United Nations Security Council Resolution number 2250. While it's a relatively young framework because it's celebrating its 10th anniversary this December, it is still very meaningful and ambitious and is just as bold as its counterparts on women, peace, and security that is now 25 years old. It asks to recognize young people not only as victims of conflict or passive beneficiaries of peace, but as agents, active agents, and decision makers and leaders in their own right. So now, in many ways, the YPS agenda still struggles for legitimacy within traditional peace and security spaces. It's frequently sidelined or tokenized or even seen as secondary to other policy priorities. But yet, for those of us who are working in this field, the evidence is quite clear. Young people are not leaders of tomorrow, but they're leading right now in most communities, actually. Often in the most challenging conditions, with the fewest resources, and in contexts where their voices are still viewed as mostly optional. Ma recherche doctorale, donc, explore cette tension en plus de profondeur. Plus précisément, je pose la question suivante. Que veulent vraiment dire les jeunes militantes lorsqu'elles exigent une participation significative au processus de paix et de sécurité? Et comment vivent-elles cette participation dans la pratique, tant dans les cadres institutionnels comme les plans d'action nationaux ou les consultations onusiennes, que dans les espaces communautaires, où elles innovent, elles s'organisent, elles mènent le changement selon leurs propres termes? Donc cette question n'est pas simplement théorique. Elle est enracinée dans plusieurs années de travail sur le terrain, notamment au Tchad, en RDC, au Liban et dans d'autres pays, ainsi que d'avec des échanges avec des centaines de jeunes artisanes et artisans de la paix, naviguant entre espoir et déception, dans leur engagement avec les gouvernements, les bailleurs de fonds et les institutions internationales. Trop souvent, les jeunes sont intégrés à la dernière minute, invités à approuver des politiques, si ils sont invités, et ils sont invités parfois à approuver ces politiques qui n'ont même pas contribué à façonner, ou à poser pour des photos, par exemple, sans avoir une réelle influence sur le résultat. So what I've learned is that participation, when it is meaningful, looks nothing like that. It's early, ongoing, well-resourced, and based in trust. It is shaped with, not for, young people. It acknowledges power asymmetries and works to address them rather than pretending they don't exist. So my work draws on feminists and decolonial theory to help frame these dynamics. Feminist theory offers essential tools to analyze how voice, visibility, and power are distributed, and whose knowledge counts in decision-making. Decolonial approaches push us to consider how global peace-building agendas often reduce hierarchies that marginalize both youth and conflict-affected communities. Together, these frameworks allow me to challenge the technocratic framing of participation and instead center justice, legitimacy, and impact. En parallèle, ma recherche est profondément façonnée par ma pratique. Donc, j'ai eu le privilège de contribuer à l'élaboration de plus d'une douzaine de pays dans les politiques nationales en matière de paix et de sécurité. J'ai collaboré avec des coalitions de la société civile pour plaider en faveur des mécanismes de participation plus inclusifs et j'ai animé des dialogues entre les jeunes et des représentantes gouvernementaux afin d'améliorer ces politiques. Cette double posture de praticienne et chercheuse s'est révélée précieuse dans mon travail. Elle m'a permis de mieux comprendre à la fois le potentiel et les limites des cadres politiques formels et m'a rappelé encore et encore à quel point il est crucial de rester attentif ou attentive à qui établit les priorités, qui détient le pouvoir décisionnel et qui rend des comptes lorsque la participation est marginalisée. So this year, with colleagues Erica Yag and Dr. Helen Barrett's colleagues based at the University of Griffith in Australia, I'm co-editing a forthcoming book titled Youth Leading Change, Emerging Sites of Knowledge in Peace and Conflict, which will be published in September by Palgrave Macmillan. The volume brings together youth peace builders and academics from around the world, many of whom occupy both identities at once as academics and practitioners, to reflect on what it means to produce knowledge from a place of lived experience. The core argument of the book is simple, or at least I think so. Youth are not merely policy subjects or passive recipients of programming. They are knowledge producers, theorists, organizers, and builders of alternative futures. By bringing their voices to the forefront, we aim to engage intergenerationally in the generational divides in peace research and to legitimize forms of knowledge that have historically been mostly excluded from academic policy spaces. This question of knowledge, who produces it, who accesses it, and how it circulates, has also driven the development of a project I'm co-leading with the Canadian Coalition for Youth Peace and Security, which I see on the call here today, so thank you to colleagues who are joining us. This project is called the Youth Peace and Security Library. So the digital platform, which is now currently in its beta stage, is being developed collaboratively by different graduate students, youth peace builders, and advisors with the support of Research Impact Canada and the Morrow Institute for Peace and Justice at the University of Manitoba. Its goal is to serve as a central hub for sharing knowledge, advocacy tools, and research related to the global youth peace and security agenda, a space that doesn't currently exist. Donc, la bibliothèque Jeunesse, Paix et Sécurité comprendra une collection soigneusement sélectionnée de publications académiques, les rares publications qui existent, des recherches étudiantines, des répertoires d'organisations axés sur la jeunesse, la paix et la sécurité, des profils d'experts sur le terrain, ainsi que des liens vers des plateformes partenaires comme la base de données JPS développée par la Dr Behrens l'année dernière. En rassemblant ces ressources en un lieu seul, la plateforme vise à soutenir le travail des réseaux dirigés par les jeunes, des praticiens-praticiennes et des chercheurs-chercheuses à travers le monde, en particulier ceux et celles œuvrant dans des contextes sous-financés et non anglophones ou affectés par les conflits. Nous construisions cette bibliothèque pour qu'elle soit multilingue, accessible et centrée sur la communauté. Elle est conçue avec l'apport direct des jeunes artisanes de paix afin qu'elle reflète leurs besoins et mette en valeur leurs contributions. Elle comportera des fonctionnalités interactives pour favoriser les échanges, un espace pour partager des travaux originaux et à terme, et une navigation multilingue pour élargir l'accès évidemment. D'une certaine manière, ce projet répond à une frustration que j'entends souvent et que j'ai personnellement, que les espaces de recherche et de politique parlent fréquemment des jeunes, mais rarement avec eux et encore moins pour eux. Donc, to me, this is what engaged scholarship is about. It's not just about producing knowledge, but it's about ensuring that knowledge is accountable to the people and communities it concerns. So it's about co-creating research processes that reflect the values of justice, care, and reciprocity. And it's about being honest by the limitations of academic institutions while working to push those boundaries themselves from within and alongside communities. I want to be clear that this kind of work isn't always easy. It requires more time, more trust building, and more discomfort than traditional research, perhaps. But it also often challenges the very systems in which we work. But I believe it's worth it because if research is to be impactful, it must be rooted in relationships. And if peace building is to be sustainable, especially in a time where now we're doubting the very essence of peace, it must center those who are already doing the work of repair and transformation at the community. As we approach the 10th anniversary of the first UN resolution on youth peace and security, which is coming up in December, I find myself thinking about the question of legacy. Not just in terms of what policies are adopted or programs are funded, but in terms of what shifts in power, what spaces are opened, and what ideas take root. J'espère qu'à travers ma recherche et ces initiatives collectives, nous pourrons contribuer à bâtir des processus de paix plus inclusifs et plus responsables. Des processus qui ne considèrent pas les jeunes comme des simples réflexions de dernière minute, mais comme des actrices et des acteurs centrales dans la conception, la mise en œuvre et l'évaluation des politiques publiques et de paix et de sécurité. Des processus qui ne se contentent pas d'inviter les jeunes à participer, mais de redéfinir la participation selon les termes des jeunes eux-mêmes. À toutes les personnes présentes virtuellement aujourd'hui, que vous soyez chercheurs, chercheuses, étudiants, étudiantes, décideurs politiques ou praticiens, praticiennes, je vous remercie de créer un espace où la recherche engagée peut s'épanouir. Merci de poser les bonnes questions, celles qui concernent les voix que nous choisissons d'amplifier, les savoirs que nous valorisons et les moyens pour lesquels nous visons à un changement réellement significatif. And to any young people who might be on this call, who have shaped and guided some of my own works in my own professional life, thank you. You're not just the subject of my research, but you're the reason why to me it matters. Merci beaucoup again to Research Impact Canada, and thank you to everyone for coming. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Katrina, for the wonderful presentation. If there are any questions from the audience, please feel free to drop it in the chat. We're holding off on the questions for now until the end, if there's time to do a live, Q&A for that. So next up, I'd like to invite Rita Ming from McMaster University so that she can present her project.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. for joining today. I'll be talking a bit about my research. This is a specific framework that we've developed through my research called the Framework for Doing Things in a Good Way, Insights on Mexican Conservation through Weaving Western Science and Indigenous Knowledge in Whitefish River First Nation. And this is a co-authorship between myself, who is a Chinese immigrant to Canada, and as well as a lot of Anishinaabe scholars and community members from Whitefish River First Nation, and my supervisor, Dr. Chow Fraser. So there are 8 different species of turtles that are found throughout Canada, but unfortunately, the thing that unites them all is the fact that they are all considered a species at risk, whether federally or provincially, threatened, special concern, or endangered in various levels. And there have been a lot of high-level calls for the involvement of Indigenous knowledge to protect species at risk that exist at both the federal level as well as the provincial level. And these things include the Species at Risk Act and the currently being phased out Endangered Species Act that officially wrote down the fact that there are multiple knowledge systems to be acknowledged through this process. But there are still some current disparities that exist between the official recognition written in word and actual respectful involvement of Indigenous peoples, whether it's First Nation, Métis, or Inuit communities in species at risk conservation. And so that is where we propose that the weaving of different knowledge systems can and should be prioritized in these conservation programming, where Indigenous knowledge, whether Anishinaabe or Haudenosaunee or other kinds of Indigenous knowledge systems, and Western science can be brought together to build relationships, and these should be based upon respect at the center. So if you think about the braid on the side here, where the different colors represent Indigenous knowledge from Western science, the central strand of respect is interwoven throughout the entire process. So my project partner is Whitefish River First Nation, and Whitefish River First Nation, or WRFN, is located in northern Georgian Bay in Ontario. And they are a place of visions and dreams where they're currently a population of about 400 people on reserve and more folks that are living off reserve than our Ojibwe and Anishinaabe Nation, and a core partner of this project in terms of the initial development as well as the current execution of the overall program. And WRFN has ongoing land stewardship as well as land use planning that are continuing to develop their traditional territories. WRFN also has a really high biodiversity and abundant habitat, as seen through some of these drone aerial footage of different kinds of wetlands, whether it's coastal marshes or upland peatlands, as well as a unique and rare alvar ecosystem that exists in the southern end of the reserve. And with that, because of all of this amazing habitat, there are a lot of different species of turtles found here as well, including the federally endangered landings turtle, the map turtle, musk turtle, snapping turtle, and the little painted turtle. In terms of our collaboration, this began officially in 2021. We've been working together for the past 4 or 5 years, and the overall idea of this collaboration is that we are co-creating a freshwater turtle conservation program focused on all of the different species and using the Blandings turtle as kind of an umbrella species and core species of focus as well. And the goal is that we can support place-based, nation-specific species at risk conservation and highlight the importance of community-led conservation programs that honors and aligns with Anishinaabe values from the community. And we hope that this can contribute to reconciliation and doing research in a good way within the natural sciences. And here I'll be highlighting 6 main lessons that we've learned together for the past 4 or 5 years. And just noting that, again, this isn't a prescriptive list, but it's just adding to the greater conversation of how Western science researchers and Indigenous scientists can work together to create and co-create conservation programs. So, number one, we've looked at the importance of co-developing objectives. As I mentioned, WRFM was there at the very beginning and is a co-creator of this entire PhD. And it is really important to note that Indigenous and community-led knowledge and insights should form the foundation of the program, including the initial research questions. And in WRFN, we have the Shiken Conservation Program, which is turtle or freshwater turtle in Anishinaabe. And the collaboration began in 2021 again, where we identified some short and long-term goals and overall objectives, which includes identifying critical habitat within the traditional territories of WRFN, mitigating roe mortality, which is a major threat to freshwater turtles in the area, and addressing some nest predation issues that is another threat to overall population viability. And we identified these through collaborative community meetings, as well as doing fieldwork together, investigating areas and hotspots of concern, and interviewing elders in the community as well. So looking at theme number 2, which is honoring community priorities, it's really important for especially external researchers not from the community to invest time to build good relationships and learn about the overall context. And this can include things like developing culturally appropriate research protocols and shifting our own world views, and especially for folks that are coming from a more strictly Western science background where it's like the quote unquote hard science training. So in WRFN, we've co-developed a animal use protocol, and overall, this is from discussions with elders and lands department staff and youth, where it's essentially that the worldview in WRFN is that Shikin are elder siblings and they all have their own unique spirit, and it's important that when we're working with them, whether we're tagging them or notching them to identify them later on, that we can respect their autonomy. And this was co-developed through elders and land users, where we created a list of principles that highlight the fact that when we're handling animals or medicines or other plants and vegetation that are in the area, we have to handle with respect and voice our good intentions, placing sema or tobacco down with a prayer for any deceased animals that we find, which is especially relevant when we're conducting roe mortality surveys where we do see a lot of deceased animals. Ask before taking and only taking what you need, which is a core principle, especially when harvesting medicine or taking data from the land. And then also just approaching each day with a good heart and good intentions before we enter and interact with the land. We want to make sure that we hold good intentions and there are no negative feelings when going into a pristine wetland, for example. And then for the number 3, we're looking at respecting that knowledge and data sovereignty in whichever nation folks are working with. And it's basically a critical evaluation of your own participation in the colonial history of natural science. I'm sure many of us have heard of the concept of parachute science, but the fact that we're not just simply entering a study site and we want to adhere to any existing or develop some governance principles that will protect the important data. So here in WRFN, we've created a data sharing protocol that is developed according to OCAP, and that allows for secure data storage within the WRFN cloud. So all of the data collected during this PhD is returned back to the community. And we've identified some mutual benefits and co-developed a lot of funding applications that can support the ongoing longevity of this program, and then also supporting capacity building. So theme number 4 looks at learning and unlearning, where we're again just re-examining our self-belief and participating in some proactive learning in terms of not placing the burden of unlearning prejudice on the community that you're interacting with, but participating in your own learning. And then recognizing that when we are working with a new community, there are going to be many mistakes, and to partake in that constant self-reflection. So in WRFN, something we've discussed a lot is the importance of the co-benefits of research, where sure, we are protecting turtles and conserving their habitat, but we're also looking at how this program can benefit communities, which includes increased connection with the land, building careers for youth, increased financial capacity, protection of land, water, and non-human relatives, and then also increased understanding of WRFN's territory and habitats, and then supporting overall environmental education for community, youth, students, and children. So overall, for theme number 5, we're looking at community guided trajectory, where we're looking to make sure that we're not just abiding by the rigid institutional deadlines of our universities that we might be coming from, but also the time required for building relationships and securing those funding. And in terms of the research governance in WRFN, we've continued to get approval and updates from Chief and Council. We've adhered to the specific community protocols and priorities. And we've hosted a Shikingana Wabanjige working group, which means those who watch over turtles. And we basically meet twice a year to discuss on the overall progress and what are the updates to the program that exists so that we can be flexible. And then last but not least, we're looking at promoting some tangible outcomes where we hope that this research directly supports knowledge mobilization and support Indigenous and nation self-determination by demonstrating how to do work in a good way. So looking forward, we're really excited to produce and continue to produce co-authored papers. We've identified 1,500 hectares of land as critical habitat, and we've overall contributed to WRFN's community goals of identifying and understanding the flora and fauna that exists in the traditional territory. So for summaries and next steps, there are many more lessons to learn and reflect upon, and we've submitted this overall to Ecology and Evolution as a journal for their special issue, and this has actually now been published. So we want to just contribute to our ongoing reconciliation efforts and hoping that this can be seen as a case study of doing good work together in a meaningful way. So there are many people that I would like to thank, including my supervisor, but also many community members that have come out and done field work together, my lab mates, the Chief Ronnie Nagabo from WRFN, many counselors and elders that have participated in this program. So with that, I'd like to say Chimigwech and hand back over.
Thank you, Rita, for that great presentation. And I speak for all of us when referring to his comment in the chat that we loved all the turtle photos that you posted. We love those turtles. Thank you. And so I would like to invite Sarah Demedeiros next so that she'll be able to present on her research.
Thank you. Just give me 1 second. All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Demedeiros. I am a recent graduate of the Masters of Health Policy program at the University of Alberta School of Public Health. I'm also a proud recipient of the Research Impact Canada Engaged Scholarship Award. And today I'm presenting on my community-based thesis work, which explored the arts-based method of digital storytelling as a culturally responsive approach to disseminating and preserving Indigenous elder knowledge in health research. So I'd like to situate myself as a settler researcher of European descent. And over the past 3 years, I've had the honor of working alongside Indigenous elders and communities from Treaties 6, 7, and 8, as well as the Métis Nation of Alberta on projects that are focused around healing, resilience, and reclamation. So before diving into the project, I do want to introduce the 5 incredible elders and grandmothers who guided each phase of this work. In 2018, these 5 women came together to form the Grandmothers Wisdom Network, and this photo was taken at a land gathering last spring to celebrate the completion of this project. And from left to right is standing myself, Elder Darlene, Elder Lorraine, Elder Mariel, Elder Jackie, and Knowledge Keeper Norma. And on the far right is my supervisor, Dr. Stephanie Montesanti. And together, the grandmothers represent Blackfoot, Dene, Métis, and Cree ways of knowing. So the purpose of our project was to explore how knowledge translation, or KT approaches, can better align with Indigenous worldviews and cultural practices to enhance the relevance and applicability of health research for Indigenous peoples. We specifically explored the role of the arts-based method of digital storytelling, or DST, in supporting a decolonizing approach to KT. So as part of my thesis work, I did complete a literature review comparing Western conceptualizations of KT as well as Indigenous. And as many of us on this call know today, KT in a Western worldview is often framed as bridging research and practice. And the CIHR defines 2 types of KT, being end of grant, which is very linear and dissemination focused, and then integrated KT, which is more collaborative. And despite advancements and recent emphasis on more integrated KT approaches, especially within public health research, we know that collaboration alone does not address the underlying power dynamics that persistently hinder inclusion of diverse ways of knowing from informing the dominant research narrative. So there remains a critical need for more culturally responsive KT approaches, ones that go beyond just collaboration, but intentionally ground the methodology within the cultural context and worldviews of the communities engaged in the work. In many Indigenous worldviews, knowledge and practice are seen as inseparable. Knowledge is lived, it's relational, and it's grounded in everyday experience. And knowledge is shared very holistically, with no divide between how we understand and how we live in the world. So oral storytelling has always been a form of knowledge translation, and it's one that predates Western KT frameworks and models. And knowledge is shared through this reciprocal and interconnected web of relationships, and stories are used to sustain cultural continuity, social bonds, and intergenerational well-being. So given what we know about the important role of storytelling, this project explored how arts-based methods, specifically DST, could support a more culturally responsive approach to enhancing autonomous and self-determined KT. So the project was guided through 3 main objectives. The first was to explore the grandmother's motivations for sharing their knowledge in health research. The second was to assess DST as a culturally responsive tool for application not only in health research, but as well as community context more generally. And then the third was to explore essential considerations for enhancing ethical and respectful KT practices. So this project, again, used a CBPR approach, and it was grounded within an Indigenous research paradigm. Knowledge was shared through ceremony and trusted relationships, and the grandmothers gathered in a series of sharing circles, and they helped to interpret emerging themes and assign meaning using a participatory data analysis approach. And then at the heart of the project, of course, was creating the digital stories, which are short videos that combine photos, voice, music, and artwork. So this is the framework that this is actually an output of the project. So we modified a common DST framework with the goal of more centering it around traditional storytelling practices, which are grounded in ceremony, cultural protocol, and trusted reciprocal relationships. And the DST process was 3 phases, and it involves a combination of sharing circles and then online editing sessions. So the grandmothers received support in creating their stories, and we met online for about 2 months to help the grandmothers use the editing software and incorporate their creative elements, bringing their stories to life. So this diagram just visually represents how the project objectives, which are the colored rings, connect to the process of creating the stories. All right, so findings. So we wanted to explore the grandmother's motivations to understand what they value and what they envision through sharing their knowledge in health research. And for the grandmothers, their motivations were very much centered around intergenerational healing and strengthening connections to family, to community, to culture, the land, and spirituality. They often spoke about how strong cultural connections are a powerful source of strength, identity, and protection, as well as a vital determinant of Indigenous health. And the grandmothers were also motivated by the act of truth-telling, which is the sharing of their stories and lived realities to help reclaim narratives and support healing across generations. So this is a quote from Elder Jackie Bromley, who says, "The generations today, they are very disconnected. Many children don't know respect or love because they have never received it. Our teachings of love, respect, humility, truth, wisdom, and courage are powerful tools we must pass on. These are things we need to be teaching our future generations because our generations are lost." All right, so for objective 2, when it came to assessing DST as a culturally responsive method, the grandmothers reported that the tool supported authentic and meaningful KT that really honored the oral and the relational nature of traditional practices. DST helped to validate and center Indigenous ways of knowing within the health research context. And interestingly, DST helped to restore power dynamics by removing the researcher's role in so-called translating knowledge and allowing the storytellers to use their own voice in delivering their messages. Outside the KT context, the grandmothers also reported a very strong therapeutic effect in creating their videos, which acted as a reflective practice. So in this quote, Elder Mary Lee speaks to the positive aspects and potential applications of DST, saying, "I believe digital stories are the way forward because people need to hear the elder's voice. That is where the power of the message lies. When you read, you only use your head, but stories speak to the heart and soul. This is how we grew up learning our truths and our natural laws, and to truly reach our children, we must connect with their heart and soul." Lastly, in considering how to strengthen ethical and respectful knowledge translation practices, the grandmothers emphasize the importance of upholding the autonomy of community partners in determining what is shared, how it's shared, and with whom. And this is critical because we know that communities frequently lose control over how their knowledge is used and represented in research. The grandmothers also emphasize that trust is the foundation for all knowledge sharing and that building this trust requires reciprocal exchange, where researchers are willing to engage in genuine dialogue and be vulnerable and practice humility in their work. And lastly, academic partners should make active attempts to engage in co-design and reframe methodologies that reflect the unique epistemologies, values, and priorities of the Indigenous communities involved. So in this quote, Mariel speaks directly to researchers saying, "Our people have been very abused and disrespected. Our land and languages have been taken from us from those across the water. So their actions have led to our reality today. What steps do we take to build a tomorrow where we do not have to be taught about respect or accountability? Trust is a long way away, but when we change our attitudes and deprogram ourselves, you will come here and speak to us differently." So I want to end this presentation by summarizing the learnings around Indigenous KT using this beautiful piece of artwork that was created for the grandmothers by a local Indigenous artist. So knowledge is shared not just from the intellect, but through the heart and soul of all beings. And we heard that directly from Elder Mariel. Knowledge is interconnected with all of creation, including those who swim, those who fly, and those who roam among us, as well as our families and our communities. And knowledge sharing and storytelling reinforces and strengthens bonds between all of creation, which is demonstrated by those white dotted lines to really sustain intergenerational health and well-being. So these are some reflections that you can take home today. What assumptions do you make about what constitutes valid and useful knowledge? What about research methodologies? And how do your assumptions fit or not fit with Indigenous values, concepts, and existing practices? And how are you ensuring accountability in research, and what motivates you to be involved in the work? I would like to acknowledge the Grandmothers Wisdom Network, as well as the Care Lab of Dr. Stephanie Montesanti, who supervised this work, the Women and Children's Health Research Institute for funding this project, and the Alberta Spore Support Unit for providing digital storytelling facilitation. All right, thanks so much, and I'll hand it over.
Thank you, Sarah, for your presentation. So it looks like we might have some time for questions at the end. So I know there are some questions in the chat. We will hold them off for now. And in the meantime, I'll invite Rowan, last but not least, Rowan Harris from McMaster University, to present on her project.
There we go. Hi, everyone. And thank you for the other presenters for such wonderful presentations and such wonderful work. I think it really sets the stage well for my project and what I'm the work that I'm also trying to do here. So I'm going to be presenting today on my project about understanding holistic indicators of goose health around RIC Nunavut. And some of the authors in my work are community partners, Shirley Tagalick, Kukik Baker, Joe Karatik, and from McMaster, Natalie Carter, and my supervisor, Dr. Lubicic, and from Environment Canada, Dr. Dominique Henry. So my project's situated in RIC Nunavut. I'm a fourth generation Canadian of European and Chinese descent, and I'm presenting today from the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh land in Vancouver. So in RIC, there has been a really long history of hunting and hunting geese and egg picking. So the uses of geese go back for sustenance and for, tools and materials when Arviarmut, people of Arviat, were living out on the land. Every spring, when snow geese and Ross's geese would travel north from their southern wintering grounds, they would fly through the mid-continent flyway, and they would pass by Arviat, where they would lay their eggs. So spring would be a time every year where people of Arviat would get to eat geese and pick eggs after a long winter of eating caribou. But in Canada, from the 1920s to the mid-1980s, legislation banned Inuit from harvesting light geese and eggs unless it was actually in need of such game or eggs to prevent starvation. So this ban had a pretty grave impact and long-lasting negative impact on Inuit food security, cultural practices, and self-determination. So for generations, Inuit stopped hunting geese and picking eggs and banned them. And sorry, very loud people outside, but Inuit had to hunt them illegally and had to avoid fines, or their rifles and hunting tools would be confiscated. So now Inuit can hunt, and part of this project is looking towards how do we revitalize this goose hunt, because as we see, because of various reasons, in part the increase of soybean crops that the geese are eating down south, the geese populations have risen drastically and are now categorized as overabundant. So Akimuvik partners, Akimuvik Society are project partners located in Arviat, and their goal is to address wellness and food security of Arviarmut and to revitalize the community goose harvest to restore Inuit food sovereignty. So to do this, they've gathered a group of researchers together who are tackling many different project pieces to this project. Some of those project partners from Carleton University are looking at contaminants. Some researchers from McGill are looking at the nutritional impact or value of geese and getting that information back out to community. And the Canadian Wildlife Service is working with the Arviat Young Hunters program developed by the Akimuvik Society to teach goose banding techniques and to teach hunters how to hunt in conjunction with hunters in Arviat. So my research question and my piece of the puzzle is, what are the holistic indicators that can be used to monitor goose health around Arviat? And so to do this, we're following a research methodology developed by the Akimuvik Society, the RIC research method. So this method is based first on building relationships, and this is central to this process. Then next we build understanding through discussions. Next we go through a data collection phase, and then we have a collaborative analysis and validation phase. So I want to share with you a little bit more about what this actually means and what does this look like in practice, because it can look very different from each project, as we saw from the various different projects that have been presented so far. And so for me, building relationships meant going into the community for my master's project a total of 4 times now, for a total of 3 months. And during this time, while I'm doing this goose project, I got to go onto the land and join a muskox hunt and, have time with hunters. I got to go traveling with hunters and really build relationships with communities, so develop trust over multiple different trips. During some of these trips and through this next stage of building understanding, I did some terminology workshops where I looked at the terminology of the physical parts of geese and their habitats. So in this stage, we really shared about the specific language and what do each of the terms mean exactly, but also this was a time of building understanding for a cultural context and for me to understand more about lessons and ways of being and what it means to be goose hunting in the community. And for the elders, it was a chance to ask questions they had about the research, specific scientific language in the research of the various community partners. The next stage of sharing experiences, I went back again into community and did 5 focus groups to first, talk to as many people as possible with, and like have a group consensus of what we're trying to talk about first. And then I followed up with 15 individuals to do more specific interviews. So I was able to speak with 31 contributors total and really create spaces for open discussion and open dialogue. This final stage is a collaborative analysis stage. And so as part of this meant joining the entire research team from various different projects, along with Akumovik Society, staff, and young hunters, leaders in Ottawa for a larger workshop where we discussed many different parts of the project and were able to give input for every member's input and parts of their projects. And then the other part of this collaborative analysis was going back just recently for me in May, and I was able to do some on-the-land verification trips where I could take what I had found so far and really live the experience with the hunters. I was able to go out goose hunting with folks, and we were able to understand what it really means and what is a goose indicator and how is it used by hunters, so that when I can share that information back with community, it actually makes sense. So here we have a graphic for my thesis, and I want to highlight the different stages. So in these vertical columns, we have different headings of hunting, retrieving, preparing to pluck and gut, and preparing to cook and eat. So in these different stages, it became very clear that in order to organize health indicators, you really have to look at these various different decision points. And this became very clear when I was out on the land with folks hunting. There's sometimes somebody different who goes through each of these different stages. And so it's important to distinguish each of these stages based on who's making the decisions, where this decision is happening, and what is most important. So we have several different general categories. I'm still going through the analysis phase for this project, so there will be more added and more detail. So this is very preliminary, but looking at fatness as being the main key thing that people are looking at in terms of health. And then we have other things like injury or abnormalities that also contribute to their understanding of health, and other aspects like the behavior of the geese can contribute to what is known as a good goose when people are out hunting. So this is going to be organized in this way for my thesis, and it really makes sense as I was there to really understand that this isn't going to be the way that people are going to understand what is a healthy goose. To do this, I'm going to come up with a graphic for the community. So this is my very preliminary sketches that I was able to do on an iPad while I was there, and I'll be working with a community illustrator to really develop these and make these more relevant to community. But to give you a little bit of an idea, we're going to be developing 4 and actually 5 different stages or different infographics, each with a different stage. And by having photos and drawings, we hope to really be able to make it more for those people to really understand a little bit more about what it means for there to be a healthy goose. Like a list of indicators just simply isn't what people need. People need photos, and also people need the Inuit Kaimaya Tukangi principles, the Inuit lessons that accompany these, because in my discussions with folks, hunters and elders, it's clear that you don't just you go out and look for these indicators, but really the process of assessing goose health starts the moment you leave the door. So we're going to be adding some hunter safety info, another stage perhaps before about preparation. And this is going to create a material for the community that can teach people not only what is a good goose health, but what is good hunter health, what is good community health, and what does that mean about preparing before you go? What does that mean about being observant through each of these stages? And what does that mean about sharing back with community once you've caught your goose, and how do you prepare specifically for those stages? So it's been quite a process through this journey of starting just with goose health indicators, but really adapting my research as we go to encompass many more parts, because as I've learned, everything is holistic and everything is connected, and we really need to embed that into the work and then share that back with the community. So as I continue, I'm going to be continuing my analysis and then working with community partners to promote goose harvesting and learn how we can contribute to monitoring, so that we're getting all of these youth who are interested in goose hunting but might not have the resources or the knowledge to be able to build and contribute back to the story of hunting in Arviat and continuing a tradition of goose hunting and goose consumption. So I'd like to thank my community partners at the Akimavik Society. You have our elders group here working with us, community project lead Shirley Tagalik, my supervisor Gita Jubicic. The amazing learning experience for me, and it's I'm really excited to be able to share that with you today at the Research Impact Canada Award. So Matna, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rowan, for your amazing presentation. So we do have some time left over, so we'd like to invite the audience members to ask their questions. And I do know there was one, so we can start off with Rita. There's a question for you about were there any specific initial issues that you remember between you and Indigenous peoples when it came to differences in research methodology and how you solved it?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for the question. I think we were fortunate in the sense that essentially we were doing some work in a nearby archipelago studying blanding turtles in that area, and we were featured on a local newspaper, and the community lands department actually read it and reached out to us. And so we started that conversation at a very early stage before we even developed any particular research questions about studying turtles in the community. So it was fortunate that we were able to learn from the community from the get-go and not bring in too much of our external expectations. But still, I think myself, my supervisor, were all trained in a very Western science, quantitative way. So there were definitely some steep learning curves in terms of slowing down and respecting the timeline, I think is the most important lesson that at least personally I've learned in terms of how long it takes to build trust, to allow time to really build those relationships with elders that I'm interviewing. Not everyone that I reached out to wanted to discuss and talk about turtles out of the fact that there was no pre-existing relationship based on trust between myself and the specific elders. So taking time and talking to community members and receiving chief and council approval before we started to do any of those things, I think those were the things that helped prevent any large scale conflicts. And then, yeah, just spending a lot of time in the community also helped. I've been coming up for the past 4 summers, usually between May to August, so 4 months at a time. And by spending that amount of time in the community and living with folks, that really helps build that trust and helps me appreciate the amount of land-based knowledge that exists within the community.
Thank you, Rita. And I was wondering even if Sarah and Rowan had anything to add to that from their own experience to the question that was asked about if there were any, I believe it was, any issues you remember between you and the Indigenous communities and when it came to differences in research methodology and how to resolve it.
Yeah, I could comment. I think approaching this work, I came in with a desire to unlearn, what I've been trained, I guess, as a Western trained researcher throughout my Bachelor of Science and now my Master's of Science. Um, I really viewed the grandmothers as the experts in their knowledge systems and their methodologies. And so I think just like practicing humility and being reflective in the work helped me view research and view even, what do we constitute as meaningful and useful knowledge and research. It was just taking a step back from maybe that researcher role and just listening to the elders and learning directly from them.
Thank you, Sarah and Rowan.
Yeah, thanks. I think I've been super lucky in my project because I joined a project that was already ongoing. So Akimovic Society was an existing research organization that that had been working with research partners before. So I joined a research team. So it wasn't me establishing first relationships. And I think that's been a really big learning for me as looking forward to other research projects, but having the capacity of having multiple research teams working together by having lots of funding going to the Akimovic Society so that they have capacity for doing research in community has helped tremendously. So there haven't really been a lot of issues for me because we've been community partners from the start and there is capacity built in, and I'm very well supported by having so many different collaborators. So in that way, through each of the stages of my project, I'm able to check in with researchers or with community partners and verify that I'm actually on track, that I'm doing what they want me to do, and that our goals are aligned. So
Thank you, Rowan, for sharing. And I would even invite Katrina to talk about if there were any issues with that you remember between working with you and the community partners when it came to differences, research methodology or anything else, and how you resolved it.
Yes, thank you. And very interesting because the other three recipients have very different approaches to their research and coming from different backgrounds than mine. For me, I think the real challenge is working in community where they don't speak the same language. And I don't mean that they don't speak French or English, but I mean that they don't speak the same they don't use the same type of policy words that or research terminology than we do as externals who are working in different areas. And I think that has been one of the biggest challenges to be able to be understood and to understand them and their realities. Because I mean, I've worked in country contexts like in Chad, where it is the second least developed country in the world. And the realities of their lived experience are far different than ours, of course. And this is why I think the focus on trust and relationships, and I heard it from other colleagues too, is so important because at first there is a significant distrust of the fact that if they're going to share something with you, there's already an assumption that because your reality is completely different from theirs, you will misunderstand what they're talking about or misunderstand what their experience is, and therefore there's maybe not even a point in them sharing. And so it's been, almost a full decade of working with similar communities and some of them same people over the last decade to build this relationship, build the trust, and be able to be authentic, but also coming from a place of humility of saying, I don't know all of the answers. I don't know how you experience X, Y, or Z. But we want to co-create together and co-learn together. And even though we have fancy letters after our names, it doesn't mean that we necessarily know better or more than you do, especially not in the reality that you experience on a daily life. So I think it is important to come from a place of humility, even if, we have different experiences, educational backgrounds, etc., and also acknowledging the very intense privilege that we have coming from a Western nation, from these formal education processes, and having different opportunities that are not necessarily presented to those who are living in conflict affected or underdeveloped in areas different, essentially.
Thank you, Katrina. And I see that our time is drawing to a close now, so I just want to help wrap up this webinar. So today we've heard from scholars who are not only advancing academic knowledge, but also mobilizing it. And we have heard from scholars who are also collaborating in communities, amplifying diverse voices, and putting research into action where it's needed most. So to our award recipients, congratulations once again. Your work is bold, thoughtful, and deeply meaningful. You've shown us what's possible when research is grounded in relationships, guided by real world needs, and shared beyond traditional boundaries. Thank you for your leadership and for allowing us to learn from your journeys. We also want to thank the RIC Award Review Committee that carefully evaluated each application, all the applicants who applied for the award, and the broader network of students, practitioners, researchers, and community partners who support this work every day. And to everyone who joined us today, thank you. We hope you leave this webinar feeling inspired and energized to continue building bridges between research and impact. Finally, the 2026 RIC Engaged Scholarship Award call for applications will open this November. So if you would like to stay updated, please continue to follow us on LinkedIn or subscribe to our newsletter through the RIC website. So until then, keep championing knowledge that makes a difference. Take care and congratulations once again to our outstanding award winners. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.